one, that is when your minions start to become too big for their cheap removal spells to efficiently clear. So some kind of a buff, hand buff game plan, I still think is plan A for Surrender.
Absolutely. I still do favor keeping Watley, though. He'll absolutely have the time to play that in the matchup. Rikara is also an interesting one. But for Posesi, straight off the bat, full keep, Skull in an easily get to the leftable position. Thalnos and Immolation Aura giving him some AoE potential as well. For Surrender, definitely like the Watley again. Rikara can come down as early as turn 2 if you start with the studies. And if there's not I-Beam, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah, not terrible, is it?
I favor the 3 right-hand cards, actually.
Just to get it down, tempoed out.
Yeah, if you hit Parade Leader or Bumper Car, that's one of the situations where the early curve is actually really strong against Warrior, right? They won't... Sorry, against Demon Hunter, they won't necessarily have the clear on that first minion. And then if you have Rikara to follow up, then you can really punish them for going for greedier keeps. In the end, Surrender tosses the Rikara though, but I do like that he holds on to Watley and studies.
And I think given that he saw what was, I believe, a full keep from Posesi, he's definitely going to be a little afraid. That either means that it's a really, really good hand, or there's a skull and Posesi doesn't want to draw Il'gynoth to potentially get in the way, which is, of course, what we see here. Like, the Immolation Aura and the Thalnos are fine to have in the starting hand, but it's really just about getting that skull online on turn 6. And so for Surrender, he knows that he has up until that point to start enacting his game plan. What is the most efficient way to do so? I would guess it just goes athletic studies, and then you follow up with worry about the rest later. But again, there's still consideration for Bumper Car to corrupt the stage dive.
Yeah, I think it was either coin Bumper Car or full pass here, right? Because the studies would bring the Bumper Car down to 1. So if you play it next turn, it's not even corrupting the stage dive. And off of studies, the only card you can get to corrupt the stage dive without using coin is Rikara herself, which is not very likely to get. And so Surrender going for Bumper Car here allows him to still fully spend his mana with stage dive athletic studies and have the mana bank from studies not be wasted by playing just, for example, Bumper Car turn 2 with studies on 1 would have wasted that mana. The problem here is that he uses the coin for Watley, but I think he's okay going for that because he can get a stronger than average minion off of the studies on curve.
Yeah, he can go for very... yes, apologies, yeah, to get more stats on board. Even Playmaker first. Again, as you said, it kind of feels a similar-ish role to Rikara, where I-Beam is really the premier removal option. Once you're playing your 3-drop on turn 3, then all of a sudden you're allowing your opponent to go for... Eldraki Warblade's Hero Power, Throwglaive Hero Power, Chaos Strike Hero Power. There's a few more ways to clear off the Playmaker, but it has the potential to stick next turn even.
Gnarg's an interesting one for Surrender because he can deviate from the 2 1-cost spells he was planning to play this turn. Stage Dive is very premium to get down early, but in terms of what minions he could actually pull, having played a Bumper Car, they're actually going to be pretty expensive on average. So we could see the Stage Dive, I mean, it could have potentially come down a bit later, but he can still get down Gnarg and then studies the next turn, which by that point he'll have mana to play things like Outrider and Kargath Prime.
Samuro, despite often being the best card to hit with Stage Dive, against Demon Hunter you always just wish it's the 30th card in your deck. You never want to see Samuro because the amount of attack it puts on board is just very often not worth the amount of mana that you are spending on it. I kind of thought he might just end up on Gnarg there anyway at the end, but just holding back on it, prioritizing cheapening his minions, and it does admittedly give him a decent curve with Playmaker, Runthak, Watley.
I'm honestly a bit surprised also to not see the Gnarg, but I guess with this game plan, Surrender's just not going to play the Gnarg in the near future. Samuro honestly can come down for tempo here. I will say it does have some niche situations where, for example, what Alutemu went for of the tempo Moarg with philosophies, that you do kind of want to have Samuro to deal with that, but I agree it's not the usual game plan you see from the Demon Hunter. Playmaker also very strong if she sticks to copy the Runthak, but it's very unlikely she sticks, so I do like the Blademaster Samuro.
You know what? I am on board. Next turn, even though you can't go for Runthak, you didn't really want to go for Runthak anyway, because they probably wouldn't play anything for you to attack into, and therefore just Playmaker Gnarg, keep spending your mana, set up for the Watley draw afterwards. As long as you're applying some kind of pressure and making it difficult for Posesi, you're doing your job in the early game. Kind of a weird spot for Posesi, where obviously Thalnos Immolation Aura is your first instinct because it just gets the skull in the outcast position for 2 turns time, but it's not an especially strong play.
Really isn't, and also I think he would like to hold on to the Immolation for the turn before Skull, just in case there is a big development, you clear that, and then just take the draw after that. Problem is, the only way to buff the Immolation to a relevant clear is that Thalnos, which he does kind of want to play this turn, even if it's just like Thalnos Throwglaive once on the 1-2, or like Throwglaive once on the 1-2, and then again on the Samuro, then after the Frenzy procs, you can just end with Thalnos on board. I'd be interested in something like that. But the Thalnos will get him 1 more draw next turn, so from Posesi's perspective, if Surrender does develop a bit further, hopefully there's another spell damage minion to proc with. But instead, he is just going to throw out 1 aura, still has the second one in hand.
Well, I don't think that draw changes anything especially here. Probably... I guess you probably deviate over to Dark Moon Rider to attack into the Thalnos to get a bit more damage face. But even then, you could still make the argument that it's better to go Imprisoned Gnarg just to get the weapon online at some point.
It's true, but I do like the freedom of being able to send the Samuro face here. Surrender played that knowing that it's very difficult for Posesi to stick very early on, and that repeated 3 damage can get to Posesi to some awkward health breakpoints where maybe he goes for a clear when he doesn't necessarily have to if there wasn't that early pressure.
Yeah, he was really looking for I-Beam there just to make this board clear so much simpler. Now it gets a little bit trickier, but he does still have the ability to clear off a lot of this.
Yeah. Only the Samuro left, and he will end with 7 cards in hand, so Skull still technically playable next turn, but he'll have to dump 1 card off of it, which is no big deal. Very likely he'll be able to do that. As for Surrender, Watley? No. Interesting.
I guess if you're expecting Skull on the following turn, Runthak very likely to stick and very unlikely to be able to rush into anything next turn anyway. So this means that you can play Watley and then immediately buff whatever you get off of it. I think it's quite clever.
Yeah. Now that you lay it out that way, makes a lot of sense. I-Beam's pretty clutch here to take down the Samuro. He can't kill the Runthak, which is unfortunate, but hopefully he can, by that point, get to a talented Arcanist or a Moarg to clean up a huge board afterward.
I grow impatient.
The implications of starting with Runthak are huge here, honestly. Surrender will be able to get that persistent buff. Posesi putting damage on the Runthak instead. So he front loads a bit more from the Samuro, but sets up for a cleaner Immolation Aura in the near future. Probably a very disciplined play.
And now this is a huge crossroads for Surrender. He could just go for attack with Runthak, conditioning, play Warmal as a 4 attack minion, like a 4/14, or a 4/13 would be super powerful and very, very difficult for Demon Hunters to ever deal with. Or do you take the greedier route with Ringmaster Watley and buff more minions next turn?
Really difficult, because you can make the argument for Watley because you still have mana before the Troublemaker turn to go conditioning plus something like Sword Eater. But the line you lay out now, I think, plays very well into what you expect from Posesi, which is that he damaged the Runthak instead of clearing the Samuro, right? He's very likely setting up for a wide AoE, which could sweep up both these minions alongside Watley. And so getting down the Warmal Challenger as the persistent 4 damage could have huge implications. If that is cleared, though, then Surrender gets less overall value off of the conditioning and the Runthak. So he is going for the greedier line here. I think accepting that there's a strong possibility his board gets completely swept up, but saying that the refill he gets with conditioning is well worth it.
Yeah, obviously nice ordering to take an immediate hit in terms of stats because he doesn't buff the run deck, but buffing up, doesn't buff up the Watley, but buffing up the rest of his hand. But the real decision just to go for the greedy line instead of immediate tempo is going to have huge ramifications. Admittedly, for Posesi, this is still an annoying board. He does have ways to clear it, but the fact that he has no minion to put Ethereal Org Merchant on is really annoying for him, because it means he has to go for Talented Arcanist, I guess, instead.
Well, the Dreadlord's Bite is interesting now because he can just equip that and then go for Fellscream Blast, but having to use Fellscream in the first place is so expensive here because he knows Surrender's Hand is huge, gonna be buffed minions, even just the run attack alone without having seen the conditioning. You really want to hold on to Immolation with the Talented Arcanist. I don't know if he has a choice though because it's just too much damage left on the other side. Surrender's gotten the chip damage from the Samuro for so many repeated turns, has that huge implication for now Posesi having to use inefficient removal.
And the Gambit for Surrender paid off in spades. He sees the ultimate board clear, the second Immolation aura coming down, and he gets to absolutely explode now. He can put so much stats on the board. I'm not even sure what the most efficient way to do it is because you have Playmaker, you have Warmaul, Tent Trasher is interesting as well, just as the highest individual attack minion. There's so many ways to play out this turn, and it all just revolves around killing your opponent as quick as possible.
So interesting having seen 2 Immolation Aura. It almost makes you want to go wider instead of tall, right? Because at this point now you're more scared of Fellscream Blast. But then if you go wide, you don't necessarily have the mana to go conditioning, and I think conditioning is required of this hand because it's just too much additional stats to give up. So if he does start conditioning, he only has 5 mana to work with, and so can only play 3 minions on board total, including the Playmaker effect with Bumper Car. I think that's worth it, though.
Does feel that way.
Easiest Fellscream to achieve.
Yeah, and if he, of course, positioned things correctly, like you said, very difficult to get the job done in terms of clearing. He cannot also just pass the turn and set up for a combo, so some kind of response is mandated from Posesi, but with 4 Moargs in hand, he can of course find some way to at least answer the majority of this board.
Always just been majority and one thing left, which is what's made this so awkward for Posesi. If he wants to get max healing from Fellscream, he has to leave a Playmaker, which feels like a losing proposition. So for Posesi, it's also just thinking about how can he possibly get lethal in the near future. No Skull discounts left. So hard to get Skull Outcast because of that acrobatics, and no Il'gynoth in the near hand. So I don't know. I think he's forced on double Moarg and Fellscream on the bumper cars, but then he's losing the turn after, it feels like.
Oh, Draki Warblades is too expensive, I think, to fit in on this turn. Even if you have, Moarg plus Fellscream Blast, just not quite getting there. So, what? Yeah, again, double Moarg, Ethereal, Fellscream. Looks like the best you got.
It's so expensive, and he only heals for like 12 from that?
Oh, wow.
Okay, Singular Moarg with Fellscream and the swing preserves more combo pieces. Posesi knows he doesn't feel like he's in a strong position. Surrender gonna overdraw, but not always a big deal, especially since he's got the Troublemaker. Yeah, very tiny deal here.
Yeah, one of the best cards to overdraw. And now, I mean, obviously, we're just looking at Troublemaker, and I would guess a swing from the weapon. However, with Troublemaker active, maybe that pulls you away from what is almost always the best play on turn 8.
What now?
Yeah, I mean, with the Moarg on board, on the off case that the Troublemaker misses, you feel really bad, right? And I think Surrender really wants to send this 7 damage face. So deviating to Tent Trasher also seems really strong to me.
If you start with the Pirate in Sword Eater, obviously you override the weapon immediately, but it frees up an extra mana. I'm not entirely sure what that achieves for you, but it's the thing. I guess you could play the buffed up Rider on the left.
Yeah, it's a super full board after he's seen double Immolation Aura, so I'm on board for that.
Nice. Surrender
and as long as he trades the 1 health, Tent Trasher preserves the 8 on it, on the original one, then I'm fully on board for this play. Just too much stats for Posesi to get through.
Indeed, both Immolation Auras already come down. No Il'gynoth to be found. No ability to outcast the Skull on this turn. And again, even if Posesi finds a way to stay alive on this turn, it's looking very, very tricky for him to actually win the game thereafter. I do think it has to be a double Moarg plus Ethereal Orc Merchant plus Fellscream on this turn. But with pretty good positioning from Surrender, it's difficult to actually target all the minions that you want to kill.
That's right. Playmaker put far away from the threats here. Honestly, even a couple turns ago, Gunarg, even though it's kind of low impact, just the dormant tag on it makes it very difficult for Fellscream Blast to do strong things here. Big healing for Posesi though.
Yep.
All the way back up to full. And
shouldn't be a
now
problem at all, sorry, for Surrender to clean things up, though. It's really just about how to apply maximum pressure at the same time, because double Runthak into a bunch of Dark Moon Riders is, again, another must-kill board.
He'd love to be able to fit in Troublemaker if he could, though. If there is a buffed Rider here, that's a big deal because it gets copied, but
True.
I don't know if any of these have that much attack on them.
The left one is a 4/4, I believe.
Oh, then I would kind of like to see that, right? And then it goes into the 4/6 and 3/4, and then the 2/1/1s in the 4/2.
Fair. I mean, I think the idea is that this kind of puts more attack on board anyway. And if you've seen both the Immolation Auras, you don't need to be especially afraid, especially as you've also seen both the Fell Screams. So playing a bunch of 1/1s or 2/2s is really tricky to kill.
Fair, but the Troublemaker could push immediate damage.
Also true.
I guess the breakpoints don't really matter for Surrender, right? If he presents lethal on board after having seen that Fellscream Blast, it needs to be the other Fellscream to clear this. And if it's Fellscream for not lethal, then Posesi a lot of times gives up his combo. Here we go, Skull.
Many cards left.
Is that okay? Il'gynoth second to bottom card.
And so for Posesi, if he can survive here, there's obviously not room for Troublemaker and it's 3/3s. There is 11, 14, 16, 23, 26 damage on the other side at minimum. I don't think you're getting out of range of that.
He does have I-Beam. Oh, okay. That was a really quick concede. I don't know if he did the math as quick as you did there. Yeah, with the I-Beam probably couldn't stay alive, and he had Stelina to maybe try and put back Troublemaker, but then there's no mana to play the I-Beam, so Posesi is just gonna throw it down there. Even after Renoing all the way back up to full, that Playmaker stuck for so many turns, and that's obviously, we've been saying it since the beginning, a sign that the warrior cannot be beaten, right? Positioning from Surrender, yep. Gunarg positioning, that Dormant is low-key so insane here.
Yeah, just very, very well played from Surrender throughout. I think he realizes the hidden aspect of this matchup, which is, although a lot of the time you are dead on turn 8 versus OTK Demon Hunter, if you go for the Watley play into buffing up minions, playing big turns on turn 6 and 7, they have to spend so many resources killing your board that it delays the combo anyway. So even though it's a relatively slow game plan that Surrender was going for, he really didn't put any kind of a reasonable threat online until turn 6. It's so threatening once it does come down that the OTK Demon Hunter cannot just ignore and draw through to their combo, which means that Surrender was able to get the win. Very, very well played, and Posesi now moving on to the Rush Warrior of his own.
Yeah, that was so cool. Even the little decisions at the beginning of coining out Bumper Car, where it wasn't super straightforward over athletic studies and giving up that discount because his curve was still intact. It was just a way to ensure that the hand still is fluid on top of the Ringmaster Watley turn, which he didn't even go for on turn 5. It was starting with the Runthak that allowed him to get so much persistent stats. And the Samuro on curve, that cannot be understated how much damage it dealt. Just not the most straightforward or intuitive way to play this deck, but against specifically OTK Demon Hunter was so difficult for Posesi to deal with. But now he has the potential to queue the deck himself, like you said, and Surrender will either be on his Rogue or the Paladin, both of which I think are good matchups for the Rush Warrior. The Paladin a bit less doable, but I still like Rush Warrior's chances because it seems to me they don't have any problem dealing with 8/8s.
Yeah, exactly. If you get these similar hands to what Surrender has been going for the last few games, where you find the Waters, you go for a big buffed up hand, you're just on average playing better minions than what the Libram Paladin can do. And in what is such a board-focused matchup, that often will come out in the lead. Things can get a little bit complicated later on, where the Libram Paladin can outvalue, I suppose, technically, the Rush Warrior. And of course, there's the added fact that Rush Warrior is very limited in its life gain, whereas Libram Paladin has plenty with double Librams of Hope and Alexstrasza. But I do still agree, a little bit more efficient in terms of fighting for board is the Rush Warrior. And so Surrender doesn't have the best of matchups at all, but I think he's been playing very well on the Libram Paladin. For what is a very linear deck overall, the few choices he has as to how to pilot things differently, I think he's made the right choice almost every time.
And a crucial point for both these decks is running Blade Master Samuro, which traditionally in the mirror for either of these decks is a trump card in order to take back the board. For Libram Paladin, you have ways to buff it, but they're rather limited compared to Rush Warrior. However, you do also have Libram of Justice, which is a full clear with Samuro almost always. Surrender with a very awful opening hand, though.
Yeah, very, very slow. Not really doing anything at all. Posesi is going to be thinking, what secret would they just play out there? Surely it's not an Oh My Yogg, given that he has the coin in hand. But either way, I can agree with not going for Coin Crab Rider quite yet.
Reporting for duty.
No rush, he can just play it next turn. Even if it were Murgur McGurgle from Surrender there, still would be able to kill it. It is just the superior Murloc is the Crab Rider. No, just kidding. But for Surrender, Northwatch Commander is definitely a clutch pickup here. Finally got some good card draw and board presence rolling. Then the Aldor Truthseeker will smooth this hand out quite a bit. But in the meantime, Posesi now has access to stage dives that I would assume he would test for Oh My Yogg with coin first.
Yeah, I think this is... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. If he gets an Oh My Yogg outcome that gives him mana, he might still just play the Tent Trasher.
No, that's very true, but getting backstab, hey, let's just go one more challenger now. That deals with it very cleanly, still staying ahead on the board. And with 2 shots at Rakara off of the stage dive, admittedly, only the first one would allow you to actually play it next turn. These relatively unimpactful one-attack minions could become real threats in their own right, especially when Surrender just has another completely dead draw. 3 out of his 4 secrets drawn before turn 4 is an unmitigated disaster.
Yeah, that means that the Swords of the Fallen are also just terrible top decks from this point onward. It's just... I mean, the one saving grace is he has Aldor Truthseeker into Libram of Hope around turn 7, you'd have to imagine. But until then, he's completely at Posesi's mercy. I don't really see the reasoning for going for Penflinger here. I would hear the argument for Oh My Yogg, though, because he has seen the coin already.
Reporting for duty.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, while I was talking about the possibility of Rakara, when another secret was just played and you have such a potent option in hand, oh yeah, it's Tent Trasher time. Make no mistake. How you attack here, I think, is a little bit more complicated because obviously Tent Trasher seems tempting to rush in, but given that the expected play next turn is Aldor Truthseeker, taking a value trade seems very strong to me.
I like it a lot. It's only 1 extra damage he would have pushed otherwise, which is not a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, and he does get rewarded for that trade. Again, Surrender does not run Reckoning, so the Tent Trasher is safe to value trade here and then still survive.
Surrender is in a lot of trouble in this game. Obviously, Posesi has... I was going to say arguably a couple of weak turns before Troublemaker, but even having said that, Tent Trasher, Bumper Car, all of these cards are premium and make it very, very difficult for Surrender to keep up, especially as he himself has somewhat of a dead turn here before he can go for Libram of Hope.
What he does have, however, is plenty of cheap spells with Penflinger and Libram of Justice, so he has clearing potential for this next board from Posesi. Do I think it'll get there to win him the entire game? Unlikely. But I would like to see at most just 1 fling used this turn on the Tent Trasher. Potentially the Secret played or the Hand of Adal on the hero power.
Yeah, I don't think you ever get there and use Libram of Justice on this turn. Not that you were suggesting that necessarily, but saving the Penflinger to go for a bigger board sweep next turn, and absolutely getting the Hand of Adal played on something here at least gives you some hint of a chance.
Alright, yeah, because he still does just get the Libram of Wisdom back into hand, it's fine to play the Penflinger this way. It's very unlikely the 4/4 will have nothing to trade into to die immediately.
10 Trasher bumper car looks, Sword Eater bumper car looks pretty strong to me. Well, I suppose 10 Trasher bumper car is a possibility in the alternate order, of course, if you were to start with the bumper car. But I think Sword Eater to get the weapon equipped is still just so clean on this turn and sets up for cheap 10 Trasher next turn as well.
Posesi doing his due diligence, getting rid of the minion, and now Surrender still doesn't want to use Libram of Hope on this board. It's kind of small minions in the grand scheme of things, considering how tall Rush Warrior can sometimes go. But it's not a pretty looking Libram of Hope because he knows the Divine Shield is dead to tokens. He knows about a dragon in hand minimum from Watley.
It's just the only play. You pray that that's Alex Straza and not 10 Trasher. You play there's no nonsense with Playmaker or anything else. But we know Posesi has a multitude of ways to get through this. It's not necessarily the cleanest turn, admittedly, because 10 Trasher plus a token plus a sword swing does have to go in, but he is still just so decidedly ahead on board.
And the second secret from his perspective could still be Galloping Savior, I believe.
True.
He hasn't played a spell ever, so just testing first. 3 minions played, sees it's not Savior, and so he is free to not worry about a 3/4, which means the trades you outlined at the beginning are probably going to be happening.
Here for a good time.
Yeah, all just very, very clean. Tanking the extra damage. You are absolutely okay with that. Even though you know there's an Alex Straza in your opponent's deck, you're still at 17. You still got the hero power. You could tank another 8/8 and still be quite happily in the lead in this game. And again, if we wanted them to be any better for Posesi, Surrender draws a garbage card, and that was the one bad turn that Posesi is going to have for the rest of the game. Now it's just Troublemaker, Alex Straza, so many potent threats that Surrender does not really have the reactivity to answer. Yes, he can maybe get through one with a Libram of Justice, but that is just the first wave of threats that he has to try and wade through.
Yeah, and I do think he's forced onto the Libram this turn and just pray there's no Troublemaker. Or not. Looks like it's a Cariel turn with the Sword Swing, which admittedly is pretty clean into the Sword Eater. It will pull out his last secret in the deck, which is the Galloping Savior.
He can get quite a few Penflingers as well, because Avenge goes down to 0, the Libram as well. Can't do much with them though.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel like the Penflings aren't accomplishing anything because it feels like he's still gonna Libram of Justice, if not this turn, then next.
Sure, yeah.
It's down the Avenge, the Sword, and the Hero Power. To be fair, Posesi's getting down to a somewhat precarious health total, but the thing is, Surrender's just never gonna be able to stick a board from this point, right? Even with all the secrets in play.
Yeah, it would take a pretty monumental blunder from Posesi to get himself anywhere close to being afraid of Alex Straza. And so with a bump of the... it's kind of interesting here, because obviously you could attack into the 1/1, proc the Avenge, and then go Troublemaker, trade Watley into the first half of the Cariel, but instead he's going for the other route where you just leave the 1/1 as the buffed up minion, so it still only takes 1 hit from the Troublemaker, but if it misses, the downside is a lot less severe. So I think this is a clever deviation from Posesi.
Yeah, I think it's very smart. Even if it did miss, he wasn't dead just yet to Alex Straza, but I mean 75% of the time you don't even have to worry about that. Gets a good outcome, and now Surrender. He's held onto the Libram of Justice for this long. You'd have to imagine 2 play around Troublemaker or just have some way to answer it. is this the time to use it? He can technically still stay alive without using it, but I don't know if he wins. Right?
Yeah, he doesn't know 100% that Alex Strasser is in his opponent's hand because I believe it was still the Tent Trasher that was drawn off of the Watley. And so I guess just praying that their hand is pretty much dead is your best chance back into the game. But Alex Strasser bump, if nothing else, is a very potent option. And honestly, maybe there's just better plays with the stage dive, the conditioning. A lot of powerful options for Posesi, but he just takes first port of call, play an 8-8, hit them, win the game.
Surrender can still kill it though. Again, we've talked about the Libram over and over. He's seen a Troublemaker now as well. But beyond that, Surrender still has outs, right? Second Libram of Hope, Lady Liadrin, and N'Zoth all still in the deck. Sorry, N'Zoth's not in this deck. That's in the Rush Warrior.
Yeah, it wouldn't even be that good at this point either. But yes, as you say, the Libram of Hope being the big one, Lady Liadrin a little slow, but could still get there. Missing the Libram of Hope, however, off this Knight of Anointment is rough. Can still draw for it again, obviously, with Hand of Adal.
I do think he has to go for the Justice. It's a full clear. And he gets to go wide, right? Which is as good a way as any of playing around second Troublemaker, which is his biggest fear at this point, to be honest, because Posesi has used a lot of his heavy hitters. Oh My Yogg has been in place for many, many turns now, so against singular conditioning, Surrender is also just fine, but we can see Posesi can proc it with other spells.
Yeah, there's still multiple routes here for Posesi to be in the lead. He has multiple chances at finding and buffing Samuro as well, actually, which is what he will, of course, be looking for off of either the studies or the stage dive, or just drawing it straight up off the top to be able to delete this board as well.
To be fair, between the stage dives and the draws, you're right. It was pretty likely he would have hit it, but yeah, Surrender's not going to be happy about this one. That's a good outcome, too.
Yeah, really not bad.
Just deliberately proc Galloping Savior now because it just gets caught in the Samuro's Crossfire.
Yeah, exactly. A 4-attack breakpoint, he could now just go conditioning, bumper car, Samuro. The bumper car would have to attack into the 3-1 that would be left over at the end. But that is, of course, absolutely fine. Still miles ahead on board. And leaving even Libram of Hope as a bit of a faint hope, to be honest, for Surrender to be able to claw his way back in.
Gets Lady Liadrin, still not playable alongside Libram of Hope all in one card, right? Because he hasn't hit the second Aldor Truth Seeker.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm not really seeing plenty of avenues back into this one. Although even Liadrin on her own, no taunt on it. It's just too rough.
Yep, nothing doing here. Lady Liadrin maybe with the Pen Flingers, but even then he wouldn't have had mana. Troublemaker would have closed out. Posesi equalizing this series for us here at 1 game apiece. Both the Warriors taking a win right off the bat, which again has kind of been the tale of today. Warrior has been looking very good. I think it's only lost so far in the mirror today, pretty surprisingly. Whereas yesterday it was looking quite a lot weaker, losing a couple games and only being able to get the win against the Rogue at the end. But here, against Libram Paladin, OTK Demon Hunter, I think the play has been very much on point, and the deck just performing incredibly well.
Yeah, that is right. I do think this matchup is pretty good for the Rush Warrior to begin with, but in terms of quality of play, I've not seen any over-greed with Watley, and if there is a reason for holding on to Watley one turn later, it's very clear, right? And never been too many hand space issues. The only curious game was at the beginning of the day between Posesi and Alutamu, right? Where Posesi did have that weird Drakara turn that even Alutamu was surprised by. I think in this game, though, no such errors found whatsoever. And that does mean rogues are available on both sides with decent matchups either way. I do think that Posesi is probably in a bit of a rougher position here just because of the head-to-head of Libram Paladin versus OTK Demon Hunter.
Yeah, definitely a bit of a rough one. A matchup that has been a big learning curve for me. More so when Libram Paladin was more popular, pre-nerf to First Day at School and Sword of the Fallen, when it was very, very popular here in Asia Pacific. But now I still think it's whether you're going for N'Zoth Demon Hunter, N'Zoth Paladin or N'Zoth Paladin or Libram Paladin as the two main options. Either way, you have multiple ways of making cheap 8/8 Taunt Divine Shields, be it through the Carousel Rider or the Libram of Hope. And OTK Demon Hunter just does not have an efficient answer whatsoever to deal with those. And so while Surrender is definitely going for the more aggressive start, correctly so, if he does find the Librams of Hope later on, they're going to be a key piece in his arsenal to fight back against the removal.
Posesi, of course, keeping the skull there. I have to admit, I was interested in keeping the Ethereal Og Merchant just because I've been burned a couple too many times of getting Il'gyanaut in the one place you don't want after the skull. But I think on average, it's definitely fine for Posesi to throw it. Look for more proactive plays, card draw, or removal that's stronger than the Og Merchant in the first place. Although having said that, Og Merchant on one, probably not terrible in this matchup, right? It can challenge a Attendant on one with the hero power.
Oh, that's actually a pretty good point.
Well, that opportunity has passed, and so Posesi is just going to take the responsive route. I don't think this is worth a Throwglaive quite yet, though.
Yeah, I agree. Even in the worst case scenario of Hand of Adal, you still have a couple of ways to clear it up in the coming turns, even with just Aura plus the Throwglaive next turn. Premium minions being found here, though, especially that Intrepid Initiate, is looking hella juicy.
Really is. Maybe a bit weak to Immolation Aura, so we do see Surrender kind of playing down a higher health minion. The prime on this can't be underestimated. That can be very difficult for Demon Hunter to remove, and it's also just persistent healing, which breakpoints do matter in this matchup because Demon Hunter will often have to use a lot of their combo pieces to deal with Paladin boards. For now though, Posesi going for his Acrobatics over the Spectral Sight that most people run, and it fills out the mana just fine here with the guaranteed 2 draw.
Sure does, and it means he has the pretty potent 3 damage AoE with Thalnos plus the Immolation Aura, which could deal with the vast majority of what Surrender can play in these early turns. Just looking like it's going to be a clean setup for the Skull on 6.
Surrender does have the opportunity to use Oh My Yogg this turn, though it feels a bit unintuitive to not play it into the Skull turn, but if they don't have a tester for Immolation Aura, that can still be pretty relevant because he's developing a bunch of these minions that are dead to the Aura. I really like this turn.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, going for the aggressive route and saying the game plan can't just be about denying Skull. You have to set up your own powerful turns. Even gets the synergy there between whatever that one drop is called and the Reliquary of Souls. That's kind of cute.
I was so excited for you to say between the name of it because I also don't know the name of it.
Crimson Clergy. There we go.
There you go. Nice alliteration, care of the game team once again. Throwglaive going to proc the Oh My Yogg. No outcomes.
Yeah.
But the important part is Immolation Aura free to come down alongside hero power, you'd have to imagine, to clear off the clergy.
I wonder, because if you're on the next turn, you were to see coin into Aldor Truthseeker, just going for straight up Talented Arcanist plus the Immolation Aura would clear all of that on the following turn. And so I think by tanking a little bit of extra damage on this turn, Posesi can actually just make Surrender's next turn so much less powerful.
That's a really good spot. Posesi is going for that here. So I guess he then clears off the... No, I think clearing nothing is too much of a telegraph, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So going to get rid of the highest attack minion on board. And now Surrender probably ends up on Cariel, but I wouldn't hate First Day of School again.
Yeah, on average, I think it's not putting more attack on board because there's a lot of one attack one drops. And so just because it's a little bit more survivable, just in the case of Thalnos plus Immolation Aura or Moog Immolation Aura is something you have to be very afraid of. This does survive at 1 health against Moog Immolation. It does, however, die straight up to the Talented Arcanist plus Immolation Aura, which I think at this point, Posesi absolutely has to be looking at.
And the Eladari Studies is such a clean way to close out that last mana he needs to use. Discount the Skull, have more flexibility for the next turn. Really not going for it. Interesting.
Yeah, I guess whichever card you discover is essentially unplayable, so you'd be getting an extra mana for next turn at the expense of having a card that's difficult to outcast. It's close.
I don't know. The flexibility seemed pretty good to me here, even if he just draws like another Og Merchant off the rest of this turn, just to keep the hand space rolling cleanly.
Armor Vendor is a little rough. You really don't want to give your opponent that extra 4 armor, but Abusive Sergeant, Prize Plunderer, none of these are good 1-drops in the matchup.
Yeah. Render just looking to hold on to the coin because from this point onward, his curve looks pretty clear. Just Ashbringer with no lifesteal, you know, until the coin, Libram of Hope, and pray that that gets there.
Get in there and fight, maggot!
Galloping Savior is the last card, you have to imagine.
You'd think so, yeah. Prize Plunderer does still have some amount of value in the matchup. But either way, Posesi, by going for the Eladari Studies first, can test for Oh My Yogg. He wouldn't have been able to play the Skull that turn, but it means that he would still have a backup play. And doesn't mean he means he doesn't just delete the Skull from his hand.
Interesting choice because he's got enough philosophies, so I'm pretty sure it's not that. Spectral Sight from further draw is tempting, but it's hard to get it outcast. But the same thing is for I-Beam, right? You are almost going to cost this for 3, play this for 3, certainly, and that's not quite convenient. So Posesi is going to go for the Spectral Sight instead. Third card played would proc the Galloping Savior.
Yeah, it does feel like you just chill here now that you know that it's not Oh My Yogg.
Rough draws for Surrender Secrets all the time.
Yeah, there's only...
Just does one thing.
Exactly. Libram into Libram and pray that that is going to be enough. Obviously, if it was a single Moarg found, Il'gynoth found, things would be looking disastrous for Posesi. For Surrender, sorry. But the fact that none of that has been found does mean that Posesi is in a bit of a rough spot. He doesn't want to go for his removal cards now because he's expecting much more significant development later on. But at the same time, his card draw isn't that good quite yet, with just Spectral Sight being able to draw him 1 card.
I grow impatient.
I feel like he has to play it though, because what is he doing with the rest of his mana if not that? He can take a turn to clear off everything, including a procced Galloping Savior. I think his decisions still hinge on what comes off this Spectral Sight, even if it's just going to be Eldrazi Hero Power after that.
Yeah, he could end with Thalnos plus I-Beam on the Galloping Savior in order to clear it off that way, after you go like Spectral Sight, Warblades, whatever. Any way to spend all your mana.
Oh, interesting. Just not gonna proc the Savior here. It feels pretty good to proc it because he gets to clear the I-Beam from the hand and the Spectral Sight, more importantly. Like, the 0-cost spells can be dumped at any point, obviously, but it's really fitting in Spectral Sight. That's what's tempting me to go for a clear here.
Yeah, unless he's looking at getting the Spectral Sight outcast from the left-hand side of his hand. If he finds Moarg, that's good, but without it, that seems very tricky.
Yeah, it feels very ambitious to get it to the left by this point. Does create an awkward board state for Libram of Hope though, because Surrender can only cleanly trade one of these. He does not want to send 5 damage into a 1 health minion.
Yeah,
Okay,
keeping
so
it
now he's
aggressive.
just like, which way does the Abusive Sergeant go? I'd have to imagine the Thalnos. The spell damage is a bit scary.
I agree. Just that little bit too scary. Skull is found, and Moarg as the next card is kind of funny because you do want to copy that with the philosophy, but I think it's still worth it to just go for Moarg into Skull on this turn.
I agree. If he hits a cheap way to ping off this Divine Shield. He can still potentially clear with the Immolation Aura. Maybe not worth it at that point, and instead hold off for a big Fell Scream Blast for the healing. But he's just not dead next turn no matter what, right? Because Surrender doesn't have mana to play Alexstrasza. That's the big difference maker that gives him, I think, the freedom to go for Outcast Skull.
So the alternative to at least consider is outcasting Spectral Sight from the left is now not terrible because you have the Moarg. Potentially that even leads to outcasting the Skull on the left as well afterwards. That would mean using both the Fell Scream Blasts, of course, but you could use I-Beam to do that instead, to go for the combo later.
Also have to amend my statement. That's a 5-attack weapon, so he is sometimes dead to like Hand of Adal plus Libram of Wisdom.
Sure.
Okay, he hits Chaos Strike, which is a clear with Immolation Aura. Doesn't go for it though, I think, on the rope, but he's not dead.
He isn't dead quite yet. He's almost dead, but that is obviously a very, very big gap between dying and almost dying as OTK Demon Hunter, because next turn, the Moargs, the Fell Scream Blast, he should be able to happily heal back out of range.
Yeah. A very famous movie did once tell me nearly dead is partly alive.
Quite right.
It's so awkward because leaving a Moarg always feels scary on board, but he really does not want to send the weapon into it.
I mean, you can go Aldor Libram Prize Plunderer, right? And then you still get the Weapon Swing face and the 8/8 face, which I think is the only play I can really see.
Yeah, I'm on board for that. Alternatively, Libram without the Aldor, so you can get the Omayog down. I don't know if that's relevant at this point, but Render's gonna go for that.
Maybe it just trips them up. Like, it's going to be a close game, and getting rid of one of their extra spells could be the difference maker.
For going Hero Power 2 in case of Fell Scream Blast healing, or also breakpoints, because he's at 34. That's not the easiest number for Demon Hunter to deal, especially having used a Moarg.
Wow, throwing down Immolation Aura is the card he doesn't even want to care about playing on this turn. Turns into Shadow Step, fine, that does nothing. I don't think there's any outs for lethal on this turn, right? Even if Moarg is found, it's just a little bit too far off.
Is it?
In terms of mana?
Yeah, I guess so.
I think it's just short, because you'd have to play full mana Fell Scream Blast, full mana Philosophy, yeah.
Yeah, honestly, at this point for Posesi, could just be looking at a tempo play, even if he has to give up the combo. Surrenders on 2 cards, and Posesi is obviously just dead to the 8/8, so if he is going to throw down a Moarg and Talented Arcanist to clear, then might as well get even more pressure on board. Lina is the pick? How is he playing the 8/8?
He's afraid of Alex, I think, primarily, but he doesn't even see it there. Now he needs to find some way to clear all of this off. Fell Scream Blast allows him to almost clear it off. He needs the Hero Power too. I don't know if he fit it in time.
I think he did. Looks calm. Right. Alive. No Alex in hand.
Oh!
Dang. Posesi may have just turned the corner at 6 HP.
Oh!
Next card. So Posesi
No way.
needs to deal the lethal or heal back up, and he can at least heal for a decent amount with second Fell Scream, and very likely to hit second Moarg by this point, or Ethereal Aug Merchant. Can take a look at what's left for Posesi.
Yeah, so
will get him the guaranteed I-Beam as well.
that's the kicker, right? The fact that he can save the Fell Scream Blast and just go for the I-Beam instead. Because as it stands, Aldraki Warblades, even with a hero power, will not keep him safe against the weapon swings plus the Alexstrasza.
Rather thinking about whether it's worth Libram of Justice to clear one more minion. I think the game is over one turn or another, and next turn in one way or another. So I would favor swinging face here instead.
Yeah, me too. I think there's potential as well if they don't have lethal and they're afraid of dying, that they go for some kind of a massive Moarg board that you can then maybe try and clear with Librams of Justice as well.
Well, double jump gets I-beam. That's established. Moarg could be the bottom card, which then makes it impossible for Posesi to hit lethal right now. But he can heal for... not that much, actually. Just 4? Which is still within Alex range because of the weapon.
Well, you can get the Aldraki Warblades as well, right? That's how he stays out of range.
That's a big, big deal.
He doesn't necessarily have to go for the Aldraki. He may want to go for the Fell Screamer just to set up an easier lethal next turn. But I think it's not worth it just for the fear of Alex Straza. Your opponent just floated the entire turn afterwards. You can have a... You should at least be afraid of Alex Straza, even if you don't have the read.
That's fair. I mean, he knows what this other card is. And it's not Alex because he saw the hand with Stelina, but he is not taking any chances. Surrender. Blowing his hair because that was the one card he did not want to see at the end of the turn. Currently 2 damage off lethal.
And he's just going to be...
At this point, he's hoping for Moarg bottom card, in which case you just Alex face now, so you get the 8/8 body, I guess? I
think so, yeah. He doesn't have another Libram of Judgment in the deck, so he can't get there with the weapon swings that way.
Surrender can have full knowledge of Posesi's remaining cards, right? All the discovered options have been played. It's just a toss-up as to whether Moarg is in hand by this point or not, from Surrender's perspective. If it's in hand, he's kind of just dead because of philosophies, and then the minion sticking on board. So you hope it's not going to be in hand, in which case the clearing power is limited for Posesi. So I think all roads lead to Alex on board right now.
It does feel that way. I'm just looking through the deck for Surrender, trying to find some kind of hope for what may be left. But he doesn't find it. Goes for Alex into trade on the minion. Moarg is now found. Is there enough mana for lethal, though? I don't see it.
Philosophy for full cost, so no. The most you can do is 2 Moargs and Fell Scream Blast, which is only 12. Weapon swing, 16. And the Alex on the minion was so clutch here because if he had pointed Alex face, Posesi could then just go for Moarg clear, like double Moarg, and then try to win board from that point, right?
Yeah.
You could trade the 4 attack minion into the Alex Straza.
So clutch.
Surrender still doesn't have lethal next turn because of that. Oh my goodness. So Posesi can go Philosophy, Tempo, one of these Moargs?
Yeah. And then Fell Screamer.
Yes. Or play all of them? None of them?
I think he's holding back on them entirely. Okay. He's just saying, please don't find lethal here. 13 health, 9 damage currently available. 1 hand of Adal left, so even Adal into Libram of Wisdom wouldn't be able to get there. And for Surrender, that is one heck of a dead draw.
Just not getting there. And he now knows fully that Posesi will have 3 Moargs, Il'gynoth, Spell Damage, Fell Scream Blast, all available on the next turn.
Yep, 48 damage, ready to come through. Nothing could have saved him here, except for lethal. It kind of needed to be, I think, exactly. Oh no, Lady Liadrin wouldn't have done it. He hasn't played any Libram of Wisdoms this game. I don't think there were any outs.
Hand into... Yeah, hand into Wisdom is still 1 off, right?
Yeah. And there's only 1 hand left in the deck, so you couldn't go hand in hand.
We are going to go, however, to game 4 because Posesi clutches it out at the very last possible turn. This one got so close there. Surrender choosing to Alex the minion deleted Posesi's out of getting lethal, or rather taking a hold of the board and winning by a tempo, because even though Surrender had Libram of Justice, no Pentagram, so at most he only could have cleared 1 Moarg. However, not sending Alex face meant that he didn't really have lethal outs the turn after. It felt like Posesi had all his bases covered there, but the margins were so razor thin.
They really were. And there it is, the full suite of damage. Posesi moves up 2 games to 1. Looking like he's going to be our second repeat champion here in Asia Pacific after Blitzchung, of course, won 2 weeks in a row. It would be impressive to behold, make no mistake, and I wish Posesi the best, but Surrender is not going to let him off that easy. Rogue left for Posesi to take a single win, and against Libram Paladin, I would argue that's a fairly close matchup for the Rogue. These constant big minions with the heal makes it difficult to keep board and go for the burst plan at the same time, so this is still a very close affair.
It's true. I do feel like Paladin has a bit of an advantage, but in terms of draw consistency, Rogue just gets there so much more often of the time compared to Paladin, which we've already seen so many times today. Just secrets drawn before the sword kind of guts the Paladin of any value, and then a single field contact can ruin their day completely. But on the flip side, early Aldor Truthseeker with the Librams of Wisdom played repeatedly. It's really tough for Rogue to get through all of that because they only have the 2 prize plunderers.
Going to be close stuff. Even just watching this one back again, I'm kind of enthralled again in just how close it was. It really feeds back again into how that matchup can go. I think it's a very interesting dynamic between developing, healing, and trying to prioritize your card draw as the OTK Demon Hunter. But I will move on from that game and focus myself entirely on this next game, potentially the final game of the season before we head to playoffs next week to round things out. The standard Miracle Rogue here from Posesi, not going to be running the Grandmasters as we've seen in some lists, no Broom either, but I think just the standard cards can do very well against Paladin if you're able to get ahead in the early game, because once those Liberals of Hope come down, the Lady Liadrin comes down, that's when things get really rough. The mid game, however, decidedly belongs to the Rogue in this matchup.
And the early game too, sometimes, if they can hit the early Octobot. Crucially, the aggro Paladin version had Conviction, which means that there are ways to one-shot the Octobot as long as you have a 1-drop on the board. Such is not necessarily the case for Libram Paladin, because most of their 1-drops, actually all of them, because First Day of School can't be played alongside a 1-drop with more than 1 attack without having the coin, means that even with a Hand of a Doll, they cannot one-shot the Octobot, and so the Frenzy can go off, and then the Rogue can have a much better go at it.
Already, it's so tense. I think for Posesi, the improvement that we've seen from him over the season is definitely deserving of a spot in that first, second place alongside Blitzchung. But whether or not but I think Surrender, again, also deserving of not finishing in those bottom 2 spots. He hasn't had the best of seasons compared to what we would usually expect from Surrender, looking at potential relegation last week. But the turnaround that we've seen this week, all the way through to the finals, clutching it out when it matters and getting through to playoffs. Both players so deserving. Cannot wait to see how it's going to shake out. Octobot starting hand for Posesi. When you're on the play, are you seeing any reason to hold on to Swindle because you're kind of low on cards just as a result of going first?
You could look at it that way, but on the flip side, without having the coin, it's really tough to activate the combos. So I really like Posesi's decision to throw the Swindle. It's also just not the highest value card to discount with Octobot on play. I find that, if you can hit Kazakus, Jandis, Mankrik, Octobot on play looks a whole lot better. As for Surrender, keeping the sword and the first day, nothing too out of the ordinary here.
Yeah, he's drawn one of the secrets, but finally he's got a hand where he's drawn the sword instead of all the secrets at the start. And despite being 0-2 now on the Paladin, may be able to turn things around. Are you thinking Sigil Runner now to get an extra card?
It's interesting, right? I mean, even the Gunarg caught my eye for a bit, but because he's going sword next turn, that means the Gunarg would wake up turn 3 and then overwrite your second sword swing, so it doesn't look that great. Sigil Runner gets the card draw, whereas it's going to be very hard to outcast that in the near future. But then the coin also looks a bit valuable because of these expensive Librams in hand. So maybe just ending up on passes where I'd fall here because also of the threat of Octobot.
Yeah, I think Sigil Runner is kind of bait here. You want to save the coin for going coin into one of your more impactful minions. Truth Seeker, if you find it. Libram of Hope, of course, can be super impactful afterwards. But while Surrender has some tough choices, Posesi has some real easy ones. Drawing cards, Octobot next turn with an Orc Merchant to discount it as well, should he so desire. This hand is looking premium right out the gate.
I will say it wasn't super straightforward for the Foxy Fraud over Octobot on the board here, but Surrender's under no obligation to play minions into the Octobot, right? He could just go Sword and wait the next turn and then coin Truth Seeker, and then without an activator, Posesi feels like he just missed a lot of damage by not starting Foxy Fraud. So I think it's fine to go for that. As for Surrender, Sword is where my head's at here. And I think it swings face because there's too many threats of like Shadow Step, etc., undoing your work on the Foxy Fraud.
No, that's definitely true. Shadow Step would be a big punish then. Yeah, you're probably right. I was going to say I want to go for Imprison Gunark plus Righteous Observer, Righteous Protector, sorry. But as you said, it's just the problem of it overwriting the second swing of the sword with the Gunark that makes that too awkward. He's going to go with the Protector instead on this turn. I guess this goes some way to remedy the threat of Shadow Step, because he wouldn't be able to attack face first, and you could just kill it off next turn anyway.
Yeah, it's a nice halfway point for Surrender, which does get him a bit more proactively onto the board, but big problem is coin used now, so certain top decks for Surrender become a lot more awkward, such as the Cariel and the Truth Seeker to a certain extent. Still would be able to play Northwatch Commander, though, if it were off the chop. Secret picked up was Omayog. Yeah, one of them in hand, and then no more in deck. So for Posesi, if he is going to play a spell, it should be the less valuable one. But I don't think he's under an obligation to play a spell. We could just see the Octobot and Proctobot.
Yeah, that doesn't sound quite so pleasant. But yeah, that is an option, of course. You're still tempted to go for Dagger it down, and then Orc Merchant, I think, is worth considering, because this hand is good to discount, but it's not absolutely insane. You still don't have the field contact. And so just getting the Dagger online is worth a certain amount to me.
That's true. Or he can just save the Og Merchant altogether. This is still a shape of minion where just Hand of Adal is not enough to one-shot the Octobot, so it's a good spot. Also, no attendance played, so it's not like Surrender could go for Hand of Adal plus Libram of Wisdom this turn.
No, it's definitely safe on this turn, unless there's some absurd one-drop that can kill it like One Thief into devolving missiles. But not available the vast majority of the time, and not available here. Posesi, again, with a reasonable hand to discount, but not a game-winning one quite yet. So I do still think if Surrender can find Aldor Attendant, Aldor Truthseeker, reduce these Librams of Hope, bridge that mid-game that I was talking about where things can get a bit rocky, then we're talking. Then I think he could be in a very strong position.
Foxy Fraud picked up. The Swindle is not the full discount, so awkwardly you don't necessarily want to play the Foxy Fraud. But also, you kind of want to play a lot of cards this turn because it feels like the Galloping Savior is online, and then you can end with Prize Plunderer to clear it all in one fell swoop. But then there's also Omayog to think about, so Brain Freeze might be the way to start here. Yeah,
I think you go Orc Merchant first, and then if it's Avenge, you can go for Brain Freeze. Some of the time that then works. If it doesn't, you then get to play the Swindle, which is a pretty big deal as well.
Okay, Avenge is one. So now he has to be worried either about Omayog or Galloping Savior. So he can start Foxy Swindle here. If it's Omayog, the Brain Freeze to kill the minion is pretty valuable.
I just really think you want Swindle to activate here. I'd much, much rather that be the card that's actually played than the Brain Freeze.
That's definitely fair.
Ooh.
Chill of Silence. This gets rid of a Divine Shield as it stands. Oh, sorry. That was played on Posesi's side, yeah.
Yeah. It just makes things a bit more awkward for Surrender if he wants to go for like Libram of Wisdom or whatever. It just means no matter what, this is going to be basically a dead turn, which Posesi can capitalize on. All he needs once again is that single field contact. Even just a secret passage would be enough to get him miles ahead in this game. But he's got to get it soon. Surrender, again, having weak turns, but it will turn around once these Librams come online.
I mean, the sigil was so impactful that Surrender started hero power before the night because he knew he wasn't going to play any buff spells anyway.
Yeah. Ooh.
Oh my gosh. That's a top deck.
That is a top deck. And so because you are afraid of Oh My Yogg once again, I kind of like the idea of going for Wicked Stab before you even play Shadow Step, because I think that's arguably the more impactful card, just to get you a guaranteed extra card draw.
I like it as well. Stab on 1/1, sees it becomes Oh My Yogg, and then he can step, well, Foxy Fraud after it attacks, potentially something else, but I mean, there's no more minions left on the board to clear, so it's got to be the Foxy, right?
Not even that bad.
Could be the Og Merchant. Okay, now that he's drawn Vanessa, I definitely like stepping Foxy, but if that were, say, second Octobot drawn, could have stepped the Og Merchant to try and protect his field contact because Narg.
Was it Oh My Yogg as the final card played on the other side as well? That's not bad, and obviously a lot better than Knight of Anointment.
Yeah, very true.
Wow, okay.
Okay. This is a greedy line from Posesi, but, you know, he has the board to do that, not under any pressure.
Yeah, and it was guaranteed dead on the following turn, thanks to Gnarg. It does mean, though, that he has minus a 3-2 instead of plus a 2-3 on this board. Like, it's a lot less tempo that he's now generating.
Okay. Northwatch Commander for no additional value, but Surrender just trying desperately to get some grip on this board. No Libram discounters this entire time means the hopes are so far away.
It's quiet.
And honestly, Posesi kind of just homing in on lethal. Obviously, the order was correct with Surrender to not give him Hand of Adal, and instead giving him a pretty pointless Northwatch Commander. But even then, just the tempo alone, all this damage coming through turn after turn, it's so clutch for Posesi. I don't think Surrender's going to be able to keep up.
Definitely not. Rigged Fair Game is pretty likely to come get active, but then he's already got all the card draw he needs, so Combustion just in case of disaster from Surrender the next turn. Although I can't imagine what minion comes down that Posesi couldn't have cleared otherwise.
Oh, Mask of Cthulhu as well. Damage in addition to board, in addition to card draw. Everything you want to do. The Holy Trinity as Rogue is coming together. And for Surrender, it kind of has to be Aldor Truthseeker for there to be any chance. He does get it off the top, which means Libram of Hope is going to be playable next turn. But maybe even this is just too slow.
I thought you were going to say it has to be Blademaster Samuro for him to have any chance.
Oh, sure.
This board is just sticking around. And if we add the minion health and Surrender's health, it's 17. And Posesi has 7 on board. So Mask is lethal? Question mark? Right?
Well played.
Yeah.
That is just lethal. Exact lethal from Posesi with the picked up Mask of Cthulhu. He is going to be our Week 7 champion here. He won it in Week 5, winning it again in Week 7, and he goes up into that top 2 spot, guaranteed a free win heading into the playoffs. And what started off looking like a disastrous season of Grandmasters for Posesi, losing 2 out of the first 3 weeks without even coming on stream, he now wins 2 out of the 3 final weeks, and his play has just been looking impeccable throughout these last couple of weeks. Commiserations to Surrender. He will have to come into playoffs in that bottom spot, but even being in playoffs at all was a very outside possibility for Surrender coming into this week, so I think he can be happy with his performance.
That's right. It's a huge turnaround, but again, all the congratulations to Posesi. We managed to eke out just the tiniest of smiles from him after winning his 2nd week of Grandmasters. Like, Posesi shows very, very little emotion even when he's kicking former world champions into the relegation zone. It's just nothing can stop this man, it feels like. And while at the beginning of the season, you and I were always just singing the praises of Alutamu, Glory, best players in APAC alongside Surrender, Posesi has definitely cemented himself as part of that equation. He took down Alutemu and Surrender to get there, and then